Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Encounter. I'm your host, Jeff Kellam, the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church on Main Street in Endicott in the Union District. I'd like you to imagine, well, first of all, we're going to talk about church and politics. The program is produced by the Council of Churches. We're going to talk politics today. I'd like you to imagine a document that deals with corrupt judiciary, the threat of losing civil control over the military, officials not being responsible to their constituents, people lacking a voice in decisions that affect their lives. Imagine a document that deals with policies about immigration and citizenship. How about sweeping executive orders? The document that you can imagine is called the Declaration of Independence. And today we have with us the author of a book called Tyrants and Rogues. I want to get that right because I've been saying rogues and tyrants. Tyrants and Rogues. Robert Parkinson, he is a professor of history at Binghamton University. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because I have lots of questions.
Okay. I hopefully have lots of answers.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. It seems appropriate. Now, is the Declaration something that has fascinated you since high school, or is it that you realize we're up on this 250th anniversary? And
well, yeah. So it actually goes back 25 years or so when I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia, and Albert Small, who was a wealthy collector of things, he was giving a whole bunch of money to the university to name a special collections library after him. And he was one of the most prominent collectors of Declaration stuff in the world, and he wanted to give his stuff with the name of who's giving to the library, and so they put on a permanent collection, which is still there actually, and I ended up being one of the people who helped curate that exhibit, that permanent exhibit,
yeah.
And so I got to get sort of knee deep into Declaration stuff back in 2002-03, and the Declaration is always sort of featured into my scholarship in some ways, but not like this. And so it's always been something that, and then of course, this is also the 250th,
right.
This seemed like the time to do it, right?
The timing is perfect.
Yes, the timing is good.
And the book comes out or came out June 9th, depending on when we air this. I'm planning on airing it twice. When we talk about the Declaration of Independence, people remember the flowery language, when in the course of human events, and then we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It's so hard to say all men are created equal these days. And we have so many different translations of the Bible. We don't mind changing the language there, but it's awfully, you don't change a historical document.
No.
So
no.
We're not going to.
Well, you can. I mean, the women at Seneca Falls did that. Americans who have, over generations, who have tried to use the Declaration as inspiration for their causes or people that they think have left out. Like in 1848, they said all men and women are created equal in the Declaration of Rights and Sentiment put out by the Seneca Falls Convention. So people have played with it like that because of how important and iconic it is for Americans. Right. It's a touchstone that they can then use for their own sort of agendas too.
Right. And so we do adjust it for our culture and for our political belief systems. When now approaching the Declaration of Independence as a historic document, I know we can get into how it came to be, the various players in this, often around the king and all the king's men,
right,
as it were.
Right.
But I'm curious about what Were there other declarations prior to this? Were there other colonies that were, was there a model for a declaration of colonies separating themselves from the mother country?
Not to this scale. In 1776, there had been colonial rebellions going all the way back to the ancient world, right? There had been small scale rebellions of all sorts, but nothing of this magnitude, not involving this many people or this many square miles.
Yeah.
In the second paragraph of the Declaration, it's incredibly important to say we do not do this for light and transient causes, right? And so these are the very, very, very important reasons why we take this step, because that step had not been taken before of that kind of this kind of magnitude, and so they were trying to model it on other things that have happened. So really the kind of I guess godparents of the Declaration of Independence of the English Bill of Rights of 1689, and thinking about trying to model it on what the English had done in order to make it justified and something that people would be respected, not only in America, but in what they would call the candid world.
Yes, and so it falls upon Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Why Jefferson? Certainly there were other people who could have been the authors.
Yes. Well, there are interesting reasons why Jefferson. It should have been Richard Henry Lee. So Richard Henry Lee is the man who, when Virginia votes to introduce the motion for independence, right? They have that vote in Williamsburg, mm-hmm. and they send it to Richard Henry Lee in Virginia, and he stands to make the motion to say we are going to start this process, right? The way that parliamentary procedure works is the man that makes the motion is the man that also writes this document, right?
Yeah.
But except he's a Lee, and we go back to the families, and there are Harrisons who are also in the delegation, and the Harrisons don't like the Lees. It's sort of like a soap opera, right? The Harrisons don't like the Lees all that much, and so, well, Jefferson's not really aligned with one of those, so it sort of goes to him. Jefferson also has a reputation of being a good author, coming out of a pamphlet that he wrote in the summer of 1774, which sort of establishes his reputation as an author, and so that's why he's on the committee as the Virginian and not Lee. I mean, so it should have been a Lee, but and then Adams says, you know, you should be the one to write it, and then he sort of gives him the assignment as the song goes in the 1776 musical. It's kind of how it happened. Like, yeah. I'm obnoxious and disliked, and people thought, yeah, that's probably pretty true.
The right person.
Yeah. The right person.
The right
yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the fact that at the end of your book, you have the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. And you have the editorial comments.
Yes.
It's like the Google Docs where you put mm-hmm. the thing in the side.
No, it's very important.
Which I found interesting, because
yeah.
I'd not seen it done that way before. But,
yeah.
So Jefferson submits it, but the Committee of Five?
The Committee of Five.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a subcommittee made up of Jefferson and John Adams and Ben Franklin, and then Roger Sherman from Connecticut and Robert Livingston from New York are the five. Sherman and Livingston don't have a lot to do with it, and Livingston's going to leave Congress in the middle of this whole process, not long after Jefferson turns it in. So, but it is Adams and Franklin that do a lot of the early editing, suggesting things that aren't in there, and we know we know some of this process because John Adams makes a fugitive copy of Jefferson's rough draft and sends copies home, one to his wife Abigail, and one to one that we know of, at least to a friend of his named Samuel Cooper back in Boston. So we know from those documents, which are today in the Massachusetts Historical Society, we know where the Declaration was about the 19th or 20th of June, and then we see what it then looks like on the 28th of June when he turns it in, and there are significant changes. There's about 100 words are different, and there's a few grievances that are added and things, and there's some snippets going on. So Adams and Franklin have both kind of had a run at it before Jefferson turns it in.
Within the course of about 2 weeks.
Jefferson has less than 3 weeks to write it. He gets the job on June 12th, and he turns it in on June 28th. Right?
Imagine giving that to someone in Congress now.
Right.
It would take forever.
But also, he's on several other committees that takes him away from that. We know one of the weekends he has to write, he's involved in this investigation of this disaster that's happened, a military disaster that's happened in Canada, and we know because it's all in his handwriting. He's the secretary of that committee, so he's interviewing witnesses, and so if we took it's almost like I tell this to my students, like his schedule is as crazy as yours is, and so he doesn't have all this time to sit in his boarding house on Market and 7th Street in Philadelphia and stare at the wall and ponder what do inalienable rights mean. He's not doing that. He's super busy.
Yeah, by candlelight, often by candlelight.
He doesn't have time to think about a lot of these things. He's copying a lot of the stuff from earlier things that he's written. Sometimes so fast that he's making mistakes. We know now that there are moments where he's reaching for an old copy of something that he wrote when he says fellow subjects, and he goes, oh, no, that's not wrong. We're not fellow subjects anymore, we're fellow citizens. So there's a smudge on Jefferson's hand but that's a huge difference between being a subject of a king and a citizen in a republic. So the smudge on Jefferson's hand is this massive political theory divide. Right, so but he's going so fast that we don't even know. That he doesn't even know. Oh, he has to think about this thing. So
and that's the power of language. That words are important.
You bet.
And we don't think of. We have so many words in our culture these days, coming at us from all these different directions. Mm-hmm. And it's man. When you think back 250 years, these days we are just overwhelmed with information. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking of once the Declaration was finished, it went very slowly from one state to another.
Yes.
By horseback.
Right.
And was looked at by all these folks very slowly, but printed also in newspapers.
Yes.
Very early on.
Very early on. Yeah. But can I say too? There are powerful words in the doc and that we think of, but like the word tyrant, which is. Refers to George III as a tyrant, refers to him as conducting an absolute tyranny. But that word in England is seditious libel. So when the Declaration is printed in England, they have to blank that word out. So it just says, even though they're not endorsing that, just calling the king a tyrant in England could get you thrown in the Tower of London. So they blank those out. So those are how powerful some of those words are that we've sort of lost touch with. Yes. You know, when we think about calling someone a tyrant, you know, which sometimes we've pulled that word out lately, and how important in 1776 and where they really reach for that word, that is serious business.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as you think about putting a book together many books have been written about the Declaration of Independence, but you've looked at the grievances, and frankly, I'd forgotten about this list of grievances.
Sure.
27?
27, yeah.
27 grievances, and you've also taken these grievances and put them under the king and his inner circle, and then the king's officers, and then Parliament, the tyrants, and the king's fighters, the army. Yeah. And then a couple of grievances that weren't
deleted.
Included.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jefferson turned in 29, Congress approves 27.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Where did this idea come to you that you should deal with the grievances?
I mean, it's been more than 100 years. So, I mean, we have shelves of books on the Declaration, but they've almost always sort of focused on some of those words that become so iconic. They're America's mission statement, and they're very, very important.
Yeah,
yes, they're very, very, very important. But I would have bet almost everyone who's watching this show really doesn't know that there are a list of very specific grievances, and part of the reason is the Declaration, if you picture it in your mind, it's the parchment, right, block, the rectangle of print, right? Mm-hmm. That's a terrible way to actually to see the Declaration, the iconic one that they made after the fact, that we've protected and said that that's the one. And no one really saw that at all until after the War of 1812. That was not something that anybody had actually seen until really about 1818, 1920, when they started to make official copies of it, right? And they kind of, one of the reasons that it's so faded and almost impossible to read is because they ruined it as they made those copies. So, but in July and August of 1776, they saw a broadside poster was the iconic thing, and in that you can see how the Declaration, much better how the Declaration is composed. There's two introductory paragraphs. There's a list of he has 27 grievances.
He
and then
the
there's
king.
He the king. And then a 2-paragraph conclusion. So it's like a student essay, right? Introduction, body, conclusion. But you see that much better on the poster than you do for what we do.
Yeah.
So, and it's been more than 100 years since anybody had really done but also that could be super boring, right? So, like just saying, well, 1 is this and 5 is this. So that was my struggle. But then when I realized that when Americans heard the grievances or they read them, they thought about the people that were behind them, and I started to think about the faces behind the grievances, and once I figured that out, then the book almost sort of wrote itself, because then it was really talking about the people behind them. So the book is a rogues gallery of the Revolution, and it's about all the villains, so it starts with King George, but then we go through Lord North and Thomas Gage and Thomas and Hillsborough and Thomas Hutchinson and these guys who were seen as the devils of in 1776, and it's a much more sort of, I hope, readable story in that it's about them and why they made the decisions they did, and some of those guys' family and how they got to these positions and some of their biography. And so that made it much more fun, and I hope much more fun to write and to read.
Right.
So.
Well, and you also draw the contemporary, I mean, you can't help but see what's going on now in our country through the eyes of the patriots.
Right.
You know,
right.
The words of the Declaration, born out of emergency, crisis, and fear.
Yes.
This was not an explosion. This took place over a period of time when I think the oppressive rule of the king just pushed them to a breaking point.
Yes. I mean, the process, so I just finished teaching a class at BU that was an immersive class on the 9 weeks leading up to the 4th of July.
Yeah.
So, and I turned the class into the Continental Congress, and we start on the 1st of May, and so, because that's really when this process begins, and the reason it begins then is because there are, really what kicks it off is the sighting of an invasion fleet on the Atlantic Ocean. They realize that there's not going to be peace commissioners coming to settle this.
Right.
There are tens of thousands of British redcoats and German mercenaries who are been sighted on the Atlantic Ocean, and that is what really begins touches off the process. And the first elements of those troops land on Staten Island in New York Harbor on the 2nd of July as they're taking the vote.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And New York Harbor starts to fill up with warships. And what else? So that was the setting. And when Jefferson there's also disaster in Canada. There is a slave revolt happening that is really sort of on fire in Virginia. There is concern about an invasion fleet in South Carolina happening right during those weeks. So what I wanted my students to understand as we went through this is how that is really the backdrop for this. That this is emergency time. There's no time to think. There's just time to react in a lot of ways, and how critical a union is to getting everybody to defend this idea of a revolution. But you have to get everybody involved because the threats are all over the place. Yeah.
But there weren't, not everybody was involved.
No.
There were still many who, even after the Declaration is signed,
Yes.
who are still loyal to England.
All right, and that's a real thing. So if the reason you're declaring independence is to say these are the reasons why we're doing this. Hopefully, so people will support that cause.
Yeah, you want to sell it to your own people.
Primarily, the French and the Spanish too, right?
Yeah.
But our own people primarily. Yeah.
Yeah. Our guest on this Encounter program is Robert Parkinson, the author of a book about the Declaration of Independence called Tyrants and Rogues. And the book is called, subtitle is Understanding the Declaration of Independence. I wanted to mention the grievances you wrote had faces. Behind each charge was a villain or villains, and these are the tyrants and the rogues.
Yes.
Tyrants and rogues, is that yours? Tyrant certainly came up. Where's
Yes.
the rogue piece come in?
Well, rogues are people who are acting outside of the bounds of convention, and so that's certainly how they thought. They thought, because the Americans really believe that it's the British that have lost their way. When they talk about liberty, this is why this is so difficult. It's 'cause when they talk about liberty, what they really mean is the sort of ancient British conceptions of liberty, of representative government, of self-government in a lot of ways that reach back to the Magna Carta. So that's the tradition that but they think, so they basically think that the British have lost their way, so we're going to bring it over here and preserve and protect it, British liberty here. But the Venn diagram of British liberty and what the Americans are saying is there's a tremendous amount of similarity there. There's only this tiny sliver of difference. So, and that's what all this pressure is on, is to get Americans to potentially take a bullet and die, or put their families or their bodies at risk for that tiny sliver of the difference between what the British are saying liberty is and what we're saying. Right?
Yes, and it did lead to that. I mean, certainly your body was on the line.
Yes.
Blood was shed.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we think of the 4th of July, in the Continental Congress, they approved the Declaration of Independence. You would think they would just spend the whole day high-fiving with each other and drinking rum and celebrating, right? No. They spend the rest of the day writing these very terrified and desperate pleas to the people of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware to send troops to defend New York. Right? Go, hurry, right? There's no time to lose, right? That's what their main concern is.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up as our time goes by, my goodness, we find minority groups shaping the Declaration.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there are all sorts of, I mean, it's not very difficult to find people of color hiding in plain sight all over the Declaration of Independence. What ends up being the final grievance is a famous charge that says he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and when in the 18th century they used the word domestics, that is a euphemism for enslaved people. A lot of slaveholders would call, instead of referring to their people as slaves, they would call them their domestics. So when they say domestics in 1776, that's what they're referring to. So he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and endeavored to bring on to the inhabitants the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So that is a double shot at the king for inciting African Americans and indigenous peoples to try to end the revolution, to put down this rebellion. And that is something that is one of the most important sort of news stories of 1775 and 76 is how royal governors or what they called Indian agents at the time were trying to use native peoples and enslaved peoples to try to end the rebellion. But there are other places where slavery comes in, right? It pops up. The very first one, first charge is about the veto. So the king has used the veto in these sort of arbitrary and terrible ways. No one's done this for all the 18th century, and he's just slapping our laws down left and right. But the veto that Jefferson is most upset about is in 1772, Virginia had passed a very high tax on incoming enslaved people. In their way, they were thinking that this was the way to end the slave trade, was to make it just prohibitively expensive to import more men, women, and children. And the king knocked that down, and Jefferson was very, very hurt and upset by that idea that we're trying to end slavery, or to at least try to bring a sunset to it, and the king won't let us. So there are all kinds of places in which people of color are involved in shaping the document too.
This is 150 years worth of slavery on these shores by this time. And so, but many of the people who drafted this document were slaveholders.
Yes, either in 1776 or they had over the course of their lives. Yes, more than half.
Yep. So when they say all men are created equal,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, as you teach your students, what are the things that surprise them about the document? What are the things that they hadn't thought of? I mean, everybody studied this since junior high school or
Right.
middle school, you know.
Right.
So what's new to them?
Well, I think almost everybody believes that like those opening sentences are all there is to it, right? I mean, I was struck by in the 15 years ago or so, whenever the Fox network had the Super Bowl, they would have this crazy kind of, I thought it was kind of crazy, this like pre-taped sequence where they would have like football players and coaches standing in front of all sorts of like Americana vistas, in front of the Golden Gate Bridge or the Statue of Liberty, or even in front of like a train museum, and reading off phrases from the Declaration of Independence, kind of turning the Super Bowl Sunday into the second 4th of July, which we kind of have done. And but they only did the first 2 paragraphs and then maybe a little bit at the end, and they left the whole, so I would be texting with my historian nerd friends like, oh, are they going to do the grievances? Of course not, because no one thinks that that's the case. And so I think my students also believe that but this is where, on the 2nd and 3rd of July, when the Congress is spending all this time, they spend a lot of time editing this thing. That's where they spend most of the time. Those sentences that we know are like 98.6% Jefferson. They're ivory pure Jefferson, right?
Right.
But the grievances are not. That's where they spend a lot of time arguing and fighting and making some significant changes to them. And so it tells us that's where they thought they needed to get this part of this thing right.
Yep. And I'm thinking of the way we approach this coming this holiday. That it would be a good thing for people to let go of the fireworks for a little while, the concerts and so on, and actually read the document.
Well, because it tells us these were their deal breakers, right? These are the things they said we can't tolerate. And if we get away from some of the specifics of what that actually is and think about the principles behind them, as you sort of said at the top, this is about, they're very concerned about how you get justice, right? Where the trial by jury, where judges, who pays for judges and how independent are they, where a venue of a trial is. They're very concerned about some of these larger things that we are still concerned about, right? Executive orders, people who we elect being beholden to the people who are their constituents, right? These are things that we should we've lost contact with that, and I think we should reconnect with, because they're warnings to us that we didn't tolerate this, and you shouldn't either.
Yeah, right. Important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. If only we had another hour and a half, we could really do justice to this. But you do teach a course at BU, and I think that would be helpful for all of us. Our guest today has been the author of Tyrants and Rogues: Understanding the Declaration of Independence, Robert Parkinson, who is a professor of history at Binghamton University. I'm just Jeff Kellam. I'm just asking the questions on your behalf, and hope that you'll join us again next week for Encounter, produced by the Broome County Council of Churches. Our thanks to WBNG TV for the original broadcast, and to the Town Square media stations for playing the audio portion of our program each week. I serve as the Parish Associate at Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott, the retired guy who sits in for Joe Selapak once a month or so. So again, thank you. We'll see you again next week. In the meantime, I hope you be gentle with people and with yourself.